Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, July 9, 2024. Senate and House Democrats meet privately to discuss President Joe Biden's reelection campaign, as some of those Democrats continue to raise questions about the president's health and ability to continue as the party's nominee. President Biden speaks at the opening of NATO's 75th anniversary summit in Washington. We will talk with Politico's defense reporter Paul McCleary about the agenda, including an expected statement that Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell tells a Senate committee that the Fed has made considerable progress in bringing down high inflation, and the job market has cooled, and more good data could lead to interest rate cuts. U.S. House passes a pair of bills aimed at the Biden administration's home appliance efficiency rules for dishwashers and refrigerators. And former U.S. Senator Jim Inhofe, Republican from Oklahoma, has passed away at the age of 89. He retired 2 years ago after 28 years in the Senate. An article from Axios reads that President Biden's future as his party's 2024 nominee faces a potentially pivotal test Tuesday when Democratic senators meet for the first time since his disastrous debate performance. Senate Democrats returning to Washington on Monday made clear they have a lot to hash out regarding Biden's future, with several allies in the chamber where Biden served for more than 3 decades raising questions about whether he should step aside. The message from skeptical Senate Democrats to Biden was simple: prove that you're up to the task of defeating former President Trump. The Axios article goes on. The Senate Majority Whip Dick Durbin, Democrat from Illinois, longtime Biden ally, said the president's debate performance raised a lot of questions. When asked later if Biden will be the nominee, Durbin said, "We'll see." Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, who floated a meeting of Senate Democrats over the weekend to discuss Biden's future, said it is incumbent upon the president to more aggressively make his case to the American people. And Senator Martin Heinrich, Democrat of New Mexico, said Biden needs to continue to demonstrate his debate performance was just a bad night. That was from Axios. Senator Warner spoke to reporters outside the U.S. Capitol building before the Senate Democrats' private meeting.
Most important thing we can do is defeat Donald Trump. If we don't do that, we will set back America a generation. And, I'm looking forward to the chance to talk face-to-face with my colleagues. I tell you, I've had tough campaigns during my time. And, sometimes asking questions, at least in my case, made me a better campaigner. And I think a lot of folks are raising some questions they need to get asked. But at the end of the day, we got to beat Donald Trump.
Are you concerned at all keeping it in this level of ambivalence, where there isn't a definitive step forward? Doesn't that weaken him as a candidate?
Listen, this is the first time we've been able to get together, see each other face to face. And I think that's really important. And, I got to go head up to the leadership meeting right now.
How concerning was the debate performance?
Listen, I'm not going to go through that. I've had, obviously, lots and lots of input from folks across all walks of life across Virginia. And we're going to talk about that.
What were your thoughts on his response to reports of you talking to other senators? He said you don't have the same viewpoint. Do you agree with that?
I'll let other senators weigh in.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, speaking to reporters outside the U.S. Capitol building this morning. After the regular Tuesday Senate Democratic Caucus luncheon meeting, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York spoke to reporters.
Are you confident that President Biden has what it takes to win in November and serve the next 4 years?
As I've said before, I'm with Joe.
Senator
Yes.
Schumer.
Do you expect, based on differences of opinion in the Democratic Party about the president, his ability to serve 4 more years, that there might be a challenge at the convention? And if there is there the ability to throw out the virtual nomination?
As I've said before, I'm with Joe.
A few moments later during this news conference, Senator Schumer got another reporter's questions on that topic and gave the same answer.
Senator Murray, who just left, made a statement last night saying that she believes that Biden needs to do more to demonstrate that he's strong enough to defeat Donald Trump, articulate a vision, and must seriously consider the best way to preserve his legacy. Do you agree with her sentiment?
As I've said before, I'm with Joe.
But Senator Schumer, doesn't it leave Democrats in a difficult position?
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference today. The statement that was referenced from Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington State, from Monday read, "I have deep appreciation and strong respect for Joe, who has led a historic first term as president. Still, we need to see a much more forceful and energetic candidate on the campaign trail in the very near future in order for him to convince voters he is up to the job at this critical time for our country. President Biden must seriously consider the best way to preserve his incredible legacy and secure it for the future." That was the statement from Senator Patty Murray. Story from Roll Call. House Democrats on Tuesday failed to reach a consensus about whether President Joe Biden should continue his bid for a second term, as he showed no signs of stepping aside. The caucus met for a much-anticipated and high-stakes meeting behind closed doors amid Democratic lawmakers and donors' concerns about Biden's sluggish debate performance on June 27th. Some have called on for him to step aside and let younger Democratic figures pursue the party's presidential nomination. That was from a Roll Call. A reporter asked Congressman Steve Cohen, Democrat of Tennessee, outside the meeting at Democratic National Committee headquarters in Washington, if they were all on the same page. He said they're not even in the same book.
Are you all on the same page?
No. What do you mean you're not on the same page? They're not even in the same book.
Was there a consensus in the room?
What's the outcome of that meeting?
Congressman Steve Cohen, more from the Roll Call article. Congressman Lloyd Doggett, Democrat of Texas, who had previously called for Biden to step aside, said as he left the Democratic huddle that the debate cannot be unseen. He said the president has been running behind. We need a surge. We got a setback. He is a great man who has made a great contribution to the country, but he shouldn't leave a legacy that endangers us, that we surrender to a tyrant. But Congressman Lou Correa, Democrat of California, told reporters that voters chose Biden as their nominee, not us in the closed room. That was from Roll Call. Congressman Maxwell Frost, Democrat of Florida, spoke to reporters outside the meeting at DNC headquarters, referencing a virtual meeting that President Biden had with the Congressional Black Caucus Monday night.
Should President Biden still...
Yes, after the meeting last night with the Congressional Black Caucus and after spending time on the phone with Anita Dunn and other campaign officials, I feel very reassured by the president's plan. There's been this narrative that since the debate, he has not been out. He's been out. The videos I've seen of people out campaigning has been Joe Biden. On the other hand, I've seen Donald Trump on his ass riding around in a golf cart disrespecting people. So I feel reassured about the campaign's plan. They're spending $50 million in the battleground states on ads, and he's going to be on the road talking about Project 2025 and the things people care about.
So what do you make of the debate with young voters, though?
It can. I was actually just this weekend out with a lot of young voters, and the thing people brought up wasn't Biden's age, but the fact that they're scared to death of Project 2025 and the far right wing. That's the same thing they kept bringing up. I'm going to be in New Hampshire this weekend for the campaign.
Congressman Maxwell Frost, Democrat from Florida, speaking to reporters outside the House Democratic Caucus meeting held at DNC headquarters in Washington. Among the House Democrats, the handful who have so far said they do not support Joe Biden to continue as the Democratic presidential nominee: Adam Smith, Angie Craig, Seth Moulton, Lloyd Doggett, Mike Quigley, and Raul Grijalva. Gerald Nadler, who it was reported over the weekend in a private call said he did not support Joe Biden's continued candidacy, today telling reporters publicly he said he's going to remain in, he's our candidate, and we're going to support him. But Seth Moulton still wants a new candidate, and Seth Moulton was interviewed on MSNBC after today's House Democratic members' meeting.
I know that you just got out of that meeting, that first full caucus meeting since the debate. What was it like?
I tell you, it was a really healthy debate. It's exactly what Americans should expect out of a political party. Listening to the concerns of our constituents, of voters, debating them in having a really good family discussion about the way forward. I thought it was thoughtful, informative, and very respectful. So it was a good meeting. Anything come out of it? Well, I think a lot of people are looking for a consensus. There's no consensus right now. There were a lot of members who expressed concerns, gave voice to those concerns. There were members who expressed concerns about making a switch and what that would entail. I'm not going to discuss any of the details of the meeting because it was a private meeting, and I think we need to be respectful of other members' views. But suffice it to say, a lot of people are having these discussions in private, even though there's just a few of us who have gone public with our concerns.
Yeah, and why is it that you decided to go public with it? Why are you calling for the president to step aside?
Well, I'll tell you, first of all, it was a difficult decision. I've known the vice president for a long time. In fact, he was the first major politician to come up and support me, to actually campaign for me after a contentious primary in my first run for Congress. I've spent time having breakfast at his house when he was the vice president. I have a lot of love and respect for Joe Biden and for the incredible things he's done for our country. So I spent the first part of the week after the debate trying to have private conversations, reaching out to members of his inner circle, talking to folks in the White House and expressing my sincere concerns about his continuing in the race. But after those discussions didn't go anywhere, I decided it was time to go public and to share many of the concerns that so many constituents of mine have, because we understand the stakes. I know the president gets this too, but the stakes are so high in this race. We have to defeat Donald Trump. And when the polls are bad and getting worse, you can't just double down on a strategy. You need to have a change in strategy because we need to win. This is about defeating Donald Trump. That's the end of the game.
Congressman Seth Moulton, Democrat from Massachusetts, interviewed on MSNBC. After the House Democratic Caucus meeting, the chair of the caucus, Pete Aguilar of California, held a news conference.
You say you are clear-eyed when it comes to making sure that Donald Trump is not in the White House, and that's consistent with all Democrats. But it doesn't seem that everyone is clear-eyed about the future of this president. Can you address and characterize what those concerns are and attribute how you do get everybody on the same page?
You know, our caucus meeting today was about listening to members. There was no instruction to get on the same page. We were talking about the importance, the twin goals that we have: preventing Donald Trump from ever setting foot in the White House and getting 218 votes for Hakeem Jeffries on January 3rd. That is the focus of House Democrats. You have heard us say before that unity is something that is so helpful to us. Unanimity is not the same as unity. House Democrats bring different thoughts and ideas and viewpoints each and every day to this House chamber. We learn from that. We accept that. We accept each member's perspective. And our focus is to be unified. And we're unified that Donald Trump cannot win. And we are unified that Hakeem Jeffries needs to be Speaker to help the American public.
Like it's more about Trump and not so much about Biden. Isn't that the issue here? That you guys are talking consistently about former President Trump and not advocating for President Biden, saying he's the guy who has to beat Donald Trump.
Right now, President Biden is the nominee, and we support the Democratic nominee that will beat Donald Trump. That is the fact. That is where we are. And preventing Donald Trump from a disastrous reign where he can level Project 2025, where he can deport kids from families, rip families apart. That's what we want to prevent here. And that is the focus, in addition to ensuring that Hakeem Jeffries is a speaker.
Congressman Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, the House Democratic Caucus chair, at a news conference questioned by Fox News Channel correspondent Chad Pergram. Story from the Washington Times. While Democrats are soul-searching on whether to support President Biden as the Democratic nominee, House Speaker Mike Johnson and fellow Republican leaders view the president's tenure as a danger to the country. Polls and some Democrats in Washington have turned against Mr. Biden, something that Mr. Johnson said Republicans should enjoy politically, yet he's not enjoying the reality of it, arguing that Mr. Biden's condition is dangerous. Asked again if he supported Congressman Chip Roy's resolution to call on Vice President Kamala Harris to remove Mr. Biden from office with the 25th Amendment, Mr. Johnson said most Americans and Republicans would agree that it was appropriate for her to take that historic step. That was an article from the Washington Times. By the way, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, testifying today before the House Financial Services Committee, was asked by a member whether there has been any discussion about invoking the 25th Amendment of the Constitution. The Treasury Secretary answered no. House Speaker Mike Johnson spoke at a news conference with other House Republicans after their weekly closed meeting on the agenda.
Thank you all for being here on what is, I believe, the smallest crowd ever assembled for a Republican press conference. I don't know where everybody is this morning. Oh, they're chasing down the Democrats for a change. This is a really interesting phenomenon. And the reason it's so noteworthy and the reason that most of the Hill press are following the Democrats around now, we had almost no one outside our conference meeting this morning. Normally, you're all there gathered in the hallways. They're busy because they're chasing down our Democrat colleagues and asking them about Joe Biden's mental acuity and their efforts to cover it up. And that's what it's been. I mean, we could give you example after example after example. It's all on tape. It's all on record. Everybody knows it. Democrats, our colleagues, for 3.5 years have been covering up this glaring problem. The staff in the White House have been covering it up, and so have the Democrats in Congress. Just last month, I brought a couple of examples. Representative Dan Goldman said Biden was sharper than anyone he'd spoken to and that he has, quote, a photographic memory, unquote. Representative Eric Swalwell said that Biden put many of us to shame with his energy. I mean, there are example after example after example, leading Democrats and noteworthy Democrats on the Hill who have not been in the dark about this. They've been saying things I think most of them understand is simply not true, and they've misled the American people. And this is dangerous. We have the NATO summit going on, the 75th anniversary of NATO here, all of our guests from around the world. What we're projecting from the White House is not strength right now, at a very dangerous time around the world. And that's why the American people are so alarmed by this. That's why the polls say that most of the Americans, people understand that Joe Biden is not fit for that office. And it's a terrible thing. The Democrats have misled us, and they need to be held accountable for that.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference today on Capitol Hill. White House physician Dr. Kevin O'Connor released a letter Monday night addressing questions raised by White House visitor logs showing Dr. Kevin Kennard, a Parkinson's disease expert, had visited the White House 8 times over 8 months. Dr. O'Connor said that President Joe Biden has not seen a neurologist outside his annual physical examinations. Dr. O'Connor also said that Dr. Kennard has been seeing patients at the White House for a dozen years, quote, not because he is a movement disorder specialist, but because he is a highly trained and highly regarded neurologist with a very wide expertise that makes him flexible to see a variety of patients and problems. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre had tense exchanges with reporters during Monday's briefing after saying she could not confirm that information in her capacity as the press secretary. She held another news conference today.
The president has made clear he's done talking about the debate. It is time to move on. Yeah. But some of his allies have made clear they're very much still in this wait and see mode. I mean, Senator Patty Murray saying he must do more to demonstrate he can campaign strong enough to beat Trump. Senator Durbin saying he's concerned whether this is just a one-off or a larger issue. So I guess, how worried is the president that despite his best efforts, he's not going to be able to close the book on these concerns?
And Mary, I appreciate the question, but as you know, there are hundreds of members in Congress, hundreds. And I laid out a list of folks who have supported him. We've heard from Senator Coons, we heard from Senator Fetterman. There's support there as well for him. And so we just want to make sure that we put that out there as well.
We want the party united behind
Absolutely,
him, right?
Absolutely. And look, Representative Gregory Meeks said, coming out of the congressional Democrats meeting, said that they're united. And you just saw the Dem Caucus leadership take questions from some of your colleagues over at the Capitol. So that is important as well to note. But look, he had a bad night. We've talked about it. He understands people's concerns. We have been out there, as we have been in previous months, but out there obviously in the past 10 days, more than 10 days now, since the debate. And you see from his engagement with everyday people on the ground, you see him with congressional members who are showing their support, speaking on behalf of this president while we're on the ground in that respective state or commonwealth, being where we were in Pennsylvania on Sunday. And so we're just going to continue that. But look, what I can say is, look, we respect people's opinion. You just mentioned 2 senators that we were very proud working with over the past 3.5 years to get historic legislation done, and that's what we want to focus on. You're right, we do want to turn the page. You heard me say this last week. We want to get to the other side of this. We want to continue doing the work, and that's what the president's going to do.
And just to be clear, does he have plans to talk with leadership against him?
I don't have any calls. We don't have calls to read out or or to preview. He is going to continue to engage. I just don't have anything right now to share at this moment. He talked to CBC, again, the Congressional Black Caucus members yesterday. They had a very, very good call, and so he's going to continue to engage.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre during today's White House news conference. President Biden is in Washington today through Thursday for the NATO summit, and he plans to campaign for re-election in Detroit on Friday. Story from The Hill. The hardline conservative House Freedom Caucus voted to remove Congressman Warren Davidson, Republican from Ohio, from its ranks Monday night after he endorsed the primary challenger to the group's chairman, Bob Good, Republican of Virginia. A member of the group and a source familiar with the matter told The Hill that the conservative coalition voted 16-13 to boot Davidson from the group during their closed-door meeting. The caucus is comprised of roughly 36 hardline Republicans. That was from The Hill. Congressman Davidson putting out a written statement. I am not happy, but very content. Congress will soon be a better place without Bob Good, as will the Freedom Caucus. I'm disappointed that some House Freedom Caucus members, a very narrow majority of those present, viewed my opposition to Bob and support for John McGuire as an attack on them or the group. Well, that was not my intent. Their opposition to me was intended. Nevertheless, God is good and real friendships mend. That was the statement from Congressman Davidson, and reporters caught up with him and asked him for further comment this morning.
Can we talk to you about your statement coming out with the House Freedom Caucus obviously yesterday?
I don't really have further comment. I sent a statement out this morning. And
could you remind us what the statement said?
No, you can look it up. It's at vote_Davidson.
Do you have any further thoughts about just the tactics of the group in general? Do you think that they're going to change?
Congressman Davidson outside the House Republican Conference meeting this morning in the U.S. Capitol building. A few minutes later, Freedom Caucus member Ralph Norman, Republican of South Carolina, stopped by that same area where reporters were gathered.
I think the way it was done, and like I told, we were very blunt. It was a good discussion. But Freedom Caucus, our mission hadn't changed. I think taking a member, the chairman, out was a blow. I mean, was an intended blow. So, we got a great group. And members come and go anyway. Some never came to meetings. Some, we've got a lot of issues to address, which is a good thing.
Was this the third member to be removed in this Congress?
I wouldn't say removed. They take themselves out. Oh, and Congress. Well, who's I don't know the other two.
Yeah, Weber was also removed.
Who?
Randy Weber was also removed. Oh, that's the fourth. Yeah.
Well, no, attendance. He didn't meet the attendance.
Yeah.
If you don't meet the attendance, you can't know what's going on.
Is one of the things that Warren Davidson had brought up when he stepped down from the board was that he thinks that maybe there should be more collaboration with other people in other parts of the GOP conference, sort of implying that aggressive tactics like taking down rules was maybe not the best way to go about things.
That's his opinion. Now, I think Warren's right on more collaboration. Look, everything starts with the conversation. We're not going to agree on everything. They're free agents. We're all free agents. We do what we think's right. Mm-hmm. And so, but he's right on more conversation is better.
Do you think that the sort of thought about what the Freedom Caucus is has changed over the last several years?
Not at all. You look at, we're driving a conservative agenda to get to balance the budget, to stop some of the insanity that's going on, particularly as it relates to spending. We've had a good year.
It seems like there's less room for dissent within Freedom Caucus.
We have honest discussions. I don't say dissent. We have different opinions. We're all business people for the most part, and that's a good thing. You have discussions.
Congressman Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina, meeting with reporters this morning. After the vote to remove Congressman Davidson from the House Freedom Caucus, Congressman Troy Nehls, Republican of Florida, resigned from the caucus, putting out a statement saying he had wanted to encourage more members to join the caucus, but with tonight's vote, it was clear that is not their objective. He said, I'll continue to support their conservative agenda. I just won't be a member. This is Washington Today. NATO leaders, writes Associated Press, gathering in Washington starting Tuesday, plan to shore up transatlantic support for Ukraine in its battle against Russia. But for host President Joe Biden, the summit has become just as much about demonstrating he's capable of meeting the grinding demands of the presidency for 4 more years. Heads of state from Europe and North America are confronting the prospect of the return of NATO skeptic Donald Trump as Biden tries to save his reelection campaign, which has been in a tailspin following the stumbling June 27th debate performance against Trump. The president said his work at the summit, where NATO is celebrating 75 years, would be a good way to judge his continued ability to do the job. That was from Associated Press. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with the Ukrainian foreign minister at the State Department.
It is, as always, a great pleasure to have my colleague, my friend, Dmitry Kuleba here as we start the NATO summit, a summit that will further strengthen Ukraine's ties to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its path to membership. We've done a lot of work in recent weeks and recent months on that, and I think you'll see a very strong package emerge from this summit for Ukraine. More broadly, we've been working closely together to make sure that as things move forward, Ukraine has what it needs to stand strongly on its own feet, militarily, economically, democratically. And we're on a very good pathway to do just that. Ukraine's success as a strong, independent, successful country is the best possible rebuke to the aggression that continues to be committed by Putin and Russia against Ukraine, including just 24 hours ago an attack on the largest children's hospital in Kyiv, a hospital that I visited a couple of years ago when I was in Ukraine, visiting with children, some of whom had been victims of the Russian aggression, others cancer patients, suffering other illnesses, being treated at this remarkable facility. And it's particularly despicable that we would see this attack on that hospital. But it just underscores the fact that the aggression continues. Our commitment, and not just our commitment, the commitment of dozens of countries around the world to Ukraine and to its defense, that continues. And our commitment to Ukraine's success as a strong country, that continues, and that will be manifested in very concrete ways over the next couple of days at the NATO summit.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the State Department in Washington with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine. Paul McCleary, Politico defense reporter, is covering the NATO summit in Washington and joins us now by phone. Thanks for being with us. Let's start with Ukraine. Your article at Politico.com says that there's going to be one word that can make all the difference, and that is irreversible.
Yeah, that's been what the Ukrainians have been pushing for months. They know they're not going to get an invitation to join NATO at this summit. That's been decided for quite some time. And at the Vilnius summit last year, at the last NATO summit, they were kind of expecting an invitation. It didn't happen, and they're a little more realistic now. But what they want is language in the communique that will come out at the end of the summit on Thursday that will say that the ascension of Ukraine to NATO is irreversible. Things are irreversible until they're not, right? I mean, just because that document says that doesn't mean that some future president or any one of the 32 countries in NATO can object to it at a later time. But it does put them at least on a rhetorical path to getting into the alliance, right? I mean, there's going to have to be some reforms. They've done quite a bit on some economic reforms and corruption and things like that, but they have a way to go on some other issues. But to be honest, I mean, militarily and even with politically and some with the corruption issues, they're in better shape than some current NATO members. So they could be a member, but they're fighting a war against Russia. There's Article 5, which says any country that's attacked can call for the whole alliance to come assist. So there's some trepidation within the alliance, especially in the United States and Germany, to actually saying yes to Ukraine joining NATO within the next probably 2 to 3 years or however long this war goes on.
What are the other priorities for the NATO summit when it comes to Ukraine and other issues?
Yeah, there's going to be a list of or a whole host of deliverables for the alliance. Most of them are around Ukraine. One is the irreversible language. Another one is there's going to be a document signed about defense co-production. Sounds very in the weeds, but essentially what it says is that European and American companies are going to collaborate where possible to build new weapons, new systems, new vehicles, things like that, not only for the Ukrainian military, but for their own militaries who have given away tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment to Ukraine over the past 2 years. And it's been slow going. And so this has kind of been on top of the agenda over the past 2 years. There's been very little happening with new contracts to replace a lot of this equipment, with actually money flowing from government. So we're governments and militaries around the world, including the Pentagon, are getting increasingly worried about restocking their own shelves while also helping Ukraine for the foreseeable future.
Besides Ukrainian President Zelensky, there are some other non-NATO allied country leaders attending this summit. Who are they and why are they here?
Yeah, the South Koreans are here, the Australians are here, and the Japanese are here. They've been at those three countries have been at the last. And New Zealand. Those four countries have been at the last several NATO summits. NATO, before the invasion of Ukraine, NATO was making a real push to play more of a role in the Indo-Pacific and to partner more with countries in the Indo-Pacific. And part of that was to assuage the United States, first the Obama administration, then the Trump administration. Now Biden, who three administrations now who have desperately wanted to pivot U.S. attention diplomatically and militarily toward the Indo-Pacific to confront China, and just haven't been able to do it. One, because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, two, the fight against ISIS several years ago during the Trump administration. Now there's Iran and the war in Gaza. So things keep happening to pull American attention away from this pivot to the Indo-Pacific that three successive administrations have wanted to conduct. And NATO's recognized that, and they want to help where they can. I mean, some countries already have. Canada, the UK, France have sent some ships to the South China Sea, helping the United States there patrol the South China Sea. So there's some movement, but those countries in the Indo-Pacific obviously are not part of NATO, but they're partner nations, and that Europe wants to collaborate with more closely.
We're talking with Politico's defense reporter Paul McCleary. A lot of news articles are putting this NATO summit against the backdrop of the U.S. presidential election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. How much will that affect the discussion? What have you been hearing?
It's a question that comes up in every interview. And the leaders I've spoken to, understandably, have been very cautious about weighing into U.S. domestic politics at all. But when you speak to people off the record or on background, there's real worry about U.S. domestic politics and how uncertain it is and what's going to happen in the United States in November. And frankly, Joe Biden's health over the next several months of his administration, whether he runs or not. There's after the recent debate, everyone in the European capitals watched the debate, and they are concerned. Publicly, they'll say they've had meetings with President Biden, and they're confident. They're confident in his staff, but privately, just as Democrats are kind of defecting and calling for Biden to leave the race, there's real worry in Europe over the direction of the United States.
And a final question: what is it like covering a NATO summit in Washington?
It's hot. It's much hotter than normally is in European capitals. There's a big heat wave this year, so it's much the same as everywhere else. I mean, there's dinners, there's cocktail parties, there's side events. You're running back and forth between embassies around town. So that stuff is mostly the same. I think our domestic politics adds just casts somewhat of a pall over a lot of this. I mean, as I said, like Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, won't admit it, but there's worry about that. But it's other than that, once you enter the convention center, the Walter Reed Washington Convention Center in downtown Washington, there's security around, and you're in any NATO capital once you get in here.
Paul McCleary, Politico defense reporter. Find his articles at Politico.com and on X at Paul McCleary. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
And Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, I'm Susan Swain. This summer, I'll be on the air from Milwaukee and Chicago for C-SPAN's live gavel-to-gavel convention coverage. It's been a mainstay of our network since 1984. What has changed in recent years is C-SPAN's funding, now challenged by the many homes who have opted to cut the cord. This summer, an anonymous donor is generously helping support C-SPAN with a matching gift campaign. Every dollar given will be matched up to $25,000. Please consider giving to support our no commentary convention coverage and all of C-SPAN's public affairs programming. To learn more or to make a donation, find us at cspan.org/donate. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free, and wherever you find your podcasts. The Federal Reserve, writes AP, faces a cooling job market as well as persistently high prices, Chair Jerome Powell said in testimony Tuesday to Congress, a shift in emphasis away from the Fed's single-minded fight against inflation of the past 2 years that suggests it's moving closer to cutting interest rates. The Fed has made considerable progress toward its goal of defeating the worst inflation spike in 4 decades, Powell told the Senate Banking Committee. Inflation has eased notably in the past 2 years, he added, though it still remains above the central bank's 2% target. Powell pointedly noted that elevated inflation is not the only risk we face. Cutting interest rates too late or too little could unduly weaken economic activity and employment, he said. That was the reporting from the Associated Press. C-SPAN covered this hearing. Here is Chair Powell before the Senate Banking Committee, questioned by Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island.
You said in your opening statement that the labor markets appear to be in a better balance. And that's one of the key factors to judge whether interest rates can be raised. I must say I'm concerned a bit that we're not on a very faster track to decreasing interest rates from the Fed, and because of the better balance you cite. Could you comment on that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. So the most recent labor market data do send, to your point, a pretty clear signal that labor market conditions have cooled considerably compared to where they were 2 years ago. This is no longer an overheated economy. This is an economy, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that is more or less back by most measures to where it was before the pandemic. And that was a strong labor market, but it was not an overheated labor market. So I think the upshot of that really is that we're well aware that we now face two-sided risks and have for some time. But now the labor market appears to be fully back in balance. We know that if we move too quickly, we risk unnecessarily hampering economic activity and possibly interfering with the ongoing expansion. We know that if we move too slowly, that we may undo the good we've done. Well, actually, it's the other way. If we loosen policy too late or too little, we could hurt economic activity. If we loosen policy too much or too soon, then we could undermine the progress on inflation. So we're very much balancing those two risks, and that's really the essence of what we're thinking about these days.
But the direction seems to be going towards lowering interest rates at some point. We would hope that might be a wish rather than a direction.
I think if you look at the last summary of economic projections, I guess I would say it this way. It doesn't seem likely that the next policy move would be a rate increase. We don't take things like that off the table, but that does not seem the likely direction. The likely direction does seem to be as we make more progress in inflation and as the labor market remains strong, we begin to loosen policy at the right moment.
Thank you.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell testifying before the Senate Banking Committee, part of his semi-annual monetary policy report to Congress. He'll be before the House Financial Services Committee on Wednesday. You heard questions today from Senator Jack Reed, Democrat from Rhode Island. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen also gave an optimistic view of the economy and inflation as she testified before the House Financial Services Committee. Here's the question from Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Democrat from New York.
You recently told Yahoo Finance that you expect inflation to come down, and as we get into next year, you believe inflation will get back to the 2% target, and you do not see the basis for a U.S. recession. Can you explain your expectation and how the policies of the Biden-Harris administration have helped temper the rate of inflation and given you this sense of optimism?
Well, I'm optimistic because I believe that the big inflationary impulse that we saw in 2022, largely it was global and it largely reflected supply problems stemming from the pandemic and its impact around the world. And due to the work of the Biden administration and firms in the economy and the pandemic being resolved, many of those supply issues are now fully resolved. So much of the pressure has diminished. On top of that, we have a strong labor market that has attracted many new people into the labor market. Labor supply has surged, and although the labor market was initially very tight, now we have a strong labor market, but one with fewer pressures that would create inflationary concern. So inflation is coming down. The measure the Fed focuses on is now running at 2.6% over the last year, and I believe that it will continue to come down over time. Rents and housing costs continue to leave it higher than we would ideally like. Yeah. And it'll be a while before our housing costs come down to a more normal level, but that process is in train.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen testifying before the House Financial Services Committee. The question from Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Democrat from New York. On Wall Street, the Dow down 52, NASDAQ up 25, S&P up 4. The House today passed two bills that a roll call article reports block stricter energy efficiency standards for dishwashers and refrigerators as Republicans continue to push against the Biden administration's updates. The refrigerator bill from Congresswoman Marinette Miller-Meeks, Republican of Iowa, and the dishwasher bill from Congressman Nick Langworthy, Republican from New York, would prevent the Energy Department from finalizing or enforcing standards that are not technologically feasible or economically justified. Bills would also prevent the standards from being implemented unless they result in a significant conservation of energy, and the department determines they will not increase consumer costs. That was from the roll call article. Here's some of the debate on the House floor on the dishwasher bill and Congressman Langworthy.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of my bill, the Stop Unaffordable Dishwasher Standards Act, which will put the brakes on the Biden administration's relentless assault on efficient, affordable, and reliable appliances for everyday Americans through overbearing regulations. When Congress enacted the Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975, the goal was straightforward: encourage a more efficient use of energy that is both practical and cost efficient. But the Biden administration has abused and twisted this law beyond recognition to serve the radical, woke, environmental agenda of the far left. They're not just out of touch. They're making life more expensive for hardworking Americans. In fact, the Biden administration's own analysis of the proposed rule for the new efficiency standards admits that it would take more than 12 years for an American family to see $17 in savings. $17 over 12 years. And that's if their dishwasher lasts that long, which is really doubtful. This is a textbook example of big government overreach. Now, here's the bottom line. Our country is in the midst of a historic affordability crisis. Millions of Americans cannot afford to buy their first home or even save for a rainy day. And what does this Biden administration do? They pile on more regulations, more requirements, and higher standards onto the most basic household appliances.
Congressman Nick Langworthy, Republican from New York, on the House floor. Opposing this bill, Congresswoman Kathy Castor, Democrat from Florida.
When the Department of Energy creates new efficiency standards, whether it's for dishwashers or other appliances, it does so in collaboration with industry, with the support of industry and appliance manufacturers. The final standards for dishwashers were adopted in April, and they reflect the recommendations from the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. That's a trade association of 30 leading appliance makers. Second, they've said that this is a mandate, that all Americans, you have to go buy these dishwashers. Well, Americans are smart. They know that's not true. If you want an inefficient dishwasher or you want to return to the days of hand washing your dishes, that's your right to do so. But it is important that we prod appliance makers to be more innovative, to be more efficient. The guiding star, in fact, it's called Energy Star, is to save consumers money, to cut pollution, to help put a little more money back into their pockets.
Congresswoman Kathy Castor, Democrat from Florida, on the House floor. The House passed this bill to prevent the Energy Department from implementing the new dishwasher efficiency standards by a vote of 214 to 192. A second bill that would do the same thing for refrigerator efficiency standards passed the House 212 to 192. Both now head to the Senate. The Oklahoman newspaper reports that James Inhofe, the firebrand Republican U.S. Senator whose political career covered 6 decades, died Tuesday following a brief illness. Inhofe, 89 years old, was a longtime public official serving in the Oklahoma legislature as mayor of Tulsa, in the U.S. House of Representatives, and most recently in the U.S. Senate. That was from the Oklahoman. Senator Inhofe gave his farewell speech on the Senate floor in 2022 as he resigned midterm after 28 years in the Senate.
When I first came to the Senate from the House, after I gave a very spirited speech on the Senate floor, Senator Byrd came up to me and he said, "Young man, the Senate doesn't work like the House. Let me tell you about the Senate." Now, that date happened to be November the 17th, 1994, which was my 60th birthday. And until the day he died, I was still the young man. And Senator Byrd explained to me that, and this is something that a lot of the new members who are just being sworn in as we speak, here for the first time, realize that this is one of the major differences. If you make enemies in the Senate, you're wiped out. And that's not true in the House. And I spent a lot of years in the House before.
Former Senator James Inhofe, Republican from Oklahoma, from C-SPAN's video library in late 2022, part of his farewell speech as he was leaving the Senate after 28 years. James Inhofe has died at the age of 89. An AP article describes him as a conservative known for his strong support of defense spending and his denial that human activity is responsible for the bulk of climate change. Senator Mitt Romney, Republican of Utah, posting today on X, Jim Inhofe was a dedicated public servant, and his leadership as chairman of the Armed Services Committee was key to advancing our national defense. I'm grateful to have served alongside him in the Senate, and I offer our prayers and condolences to his family and loved ones. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word. You'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.